to the Burn Up Podcast, where we discuss all things agile software development and delivery.
We will be giving you an honest take on tools and techniques. We'll share our experiences, debunk myth, and hopefully provide needed inspiration.
Hi, I'm Todd Anderson, Consultant Delivery Manager. I've done just about every job in IT, from tech support, programmer, network security, project and program management. I can't say I've done everything, but I've seen a lot.
And I'm Marcel Bridge, Digital Consultant, Business Analyst and Product Owner. I've worked in digital before this even had a name, and since have been quite a bit around the block. And this is my way of giving back to the industry.
So sit back, relax, and settle in for this week's episode. Hi everybody, Marcel and I are talking to you from Bangalore, India today, as you can tell from all the honking in the background. And we're going to talk to you about offshoring and distributed teams. And we're here with our colleague Swathi Poddar. Swathi, do you want to introduce yourself quick?
Hi, I'm Swathi Poddar. I'm a business analyst and software consultant. I mainly work out of India, mostly worked on distributed deliveries. I've also worked in the UK and the US with the clients. Yeah, that's me.
Excellent.
Cool. If you haven't got the time to listen to the full episode today, here is a quick summary. So we believe that, of course, co-located teams are easiest to run, but they're not always feasible. Globalization and distributed organizations means that offshoring and distributed teams are here to stay, be this for cost efficiencies, scale, or multi-region support. So we just need to get used to it. Here is how to make them work. Hire skilled talent, put conscious effort into forming and supporting distributed teams, align all stakeholders on those efforts, and definitely over-communicate, build relationships. To make this really work, you need to put the effort in. Be under no illusion, distributed teams come at a cost, usually the cost of communication overhead. If you get it wrong, you will suffer all sorts of problems, from inefficiencies to quality issues, demotivation, frustrated colleagues, low quality of output. If you get it right, it will make your delivery cheaper, faster, and better. So, shall we go right into the first discussion point? When we say distributed teams or offshoring, how does that look like, Todd? What do you think?
Yeah, so, I mean, typically I think is offshoring is what people know it as. There's another term, nearshoring, too, which I'll also explain, but it's really the concept of not having a team co-located in a single office. Offshoring usually refers to maybe quite far away, a different country that's possibly many time zones away, and nearshoring refers to a similar situation where it might be a different country except it's closer a time zone to where you are. So, I don't know if it's really all about offshoring. It's probably any distributed team. You could definitely have a same situation even if two different teams in the same country on different coasts or something like that. I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about are pretty applicable to all that.
Mm-hmm. So you've worked on the receiving end, in quotation marks, of distributed teams or offshoring. How did that normally look like? Was that mostly you as a team executing against clients' wishes, or was there something where the clients were on site and was shared co-located?
Well, it depended based on the project, actually. Different projects, the requirements changed differently. There were times when we were just like a support team from the offshore, where we supported whatever decisions were made, wherever the core location of the team was. There were times when we were a strategically placed team and we could collaborate with the client and rest of the teams and get the delivery sorted. So.
You said to me, I think you worked in the US or with US clients a lot, and there seems to be a slight difference to working with European clients in that respect.
Yeah, it took a lot of time to actually gain the trust when it was US clients. Maybe it was specific to that particular client, but we did take about 9 months to a year, basically, to get them to trust us, for them to know that we can make decisions too, that we can also drive deliveries from our end and not just act like a support system for them, where we kind of were, just listening to whatever they said. They would actually speak to the actual clients and we wouldn't be anywhere on those calls. So
that's maybe a good point then to talk about, why did our clients expect offshoring and distributed teams. And the most frequent case I come across is that's cheap. That seems to be the key.
It's usually a budget reason. And, so people, it's cheaper. So they have X amount they want to get done. Mm-hmm. They plan X amount. They work out how many people it's gonna take, and they realize they don't have the budget for all of it. So they decide to put more people on an offshore team. That's usually the primary motivation.
I think that's the only motivation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
We spoke about working with the sun kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not fully convinced that is necessarily really working in all cases, but has any one of you guys worked with the sun?
Because I like having multiple locations, so you always
follow
have
the time zones basically.
I think that'd be really great for a support perspective. If there's some, if you're doing heavy DevOps backend type stuff, and you had very similar skill sets on each leg of the sun, then that could probably work very well. The problem is, what happens when Team A has to talk to the third team in the line, and there's either zero overlap or very little overlap, and you have to coordinate. Then somebody's always handing over, and that doesn't seem to make sense really to me. I know we'll talk about the challenges. One of the main challenges is about communication, right? So.
Yeah, I wonder, because the benefits are, apart from cost, is of course that you have larger resource pool, right? You have certain countries which have highly skilled workforce in that respect. I mean, India has, of course, the reputation of having a large workforce, IT workforce. That are benefits, but at the same time, we have experienced this on our projects where if you have just half a day of overlap, then one team starts either working very early, or another team, as we've experienced while we're here in Bangalore, that you start working late hours because the other team just, you just need to extend the overlap of time. And I don't know, Swathi, from your perspective, has that been a problem with your teams, that the work hours were getting crazy?
Yeah, it actually depends, but between UK and Europe and India, it's 4.5 to 5.5 hours, so it's not too drastic. But when we do work with US clients, it's literally your 10 o'clock is their 8 a.m. basically.
Yes.
And that's when it gets difficult. So even when we say distributed delivery and across time zones, I guess like Todd said, depending on where that team sits in, the challenge actually is bigger. But having worked with folks in US, it hasn't been too crazy. They have accommodated to come in, by 6 a.m. their time, or collaborate as much as possible, which is very important when you're a distributed delivery, to make sure everybody's on the same page. They would come in early and then would work together.
Yeah, I think, I'm sure somebody could probably work out some sort of formula that the number of time zones difference.
And that's the only way it works.
The efficiency, right, and the least efficient the delivery can be, because it's just that having that overlap is really important. Mm-hmm. and it's difficult when people are really forced to work shifted hours on both sides too, because usually there's an earlier start too sometimes to make sure meetings happen to give both teams a fair shake at understanding what they're working on. So
what I find at the moment is what we do is we have the kind of the shared meetings, like stand-ups and stuff, kind of in the middle of the day of one team, and sometimes I get up early to find time before that with the team in India, and then I think sometimes the team in India stays late to find times afterwards. But you work around the core hours really, and you extend in both directions. Right. That can work quite well. I mean, we're talking challenges here, so time overlap is a challenge. Any other challenges we can think of? Todd,
I mentioned communications. I think that's the biggest one, right? There's nothing that really replaces face-to-face interaction. And so luckily we live in a day and age where you have things like Skype and Zoom and all these different kind of products,
video conferencing
tools where you can share screens, and it's fairly effective. I think once you're used to working in that way, it's actually a pretty effective way to work, and it doesn't feel it feels like someone says working from home, so it doesn't feel like a huge handicap. In that respect. I don't know, Swathi, do you have a different opinion on that?
No, actually, I agree with you. But the main challenge that I have seen, because I've mostly worked in distributed teams, is if you do not do the separation properly, like each team being autonomous and working independently of the other. And that's when I think the major challenge is, because the one team is always waiting for the other team to come in and do a bit of handover and then take.
Yes.
And that, I think, is a bigger challenge. And I guess that's when, Marcel, you said in the beginning that we always need to over-communicate, because you always need to collaborate, make sure that the distance is not there.
I definitely want to talk about this a bit later as well, so keep that thought around how we can distribute the teams make work well, and I think there is something to do about like responsibilities and stuff. So hold that thought. We'll definitely come back to that. But when you say communication, so okay, we have kind of three people from different countries in the room, right? American and German and someone from India. So we already have different accents, right? Speaking English. I mean, you know.
What accent?
Exactly.
I don't have an accent.
Well, I certainly do, apparently. But there is also communication. Shall we quickly talk about cultural differences? And I think there's cultural differences between roles, ways of working. Different offices have different styles of working. Also, the classic cultural differences. And I think we've maybe all struggled a little bit at times with teams where just because you hadn't met face to face, you were making assumptions how people behaved or what they were thinking, and you maybe weren't fully understanding them. And I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, if you're reading Slack and there's someone's writing a Slack message and you read it the wrong way, it's like reading email. It's just not high bandwidth enough. And you're like, oh, is that guy mad at me? Is I got really pissed off at me? Or it's like, no, actually, it's just a laid back person and it's just they're writing short sentences or something like that. So it is hard, if you. I think culturally though, I haven't found too much of a struggle with that because I think it really comes down to the individuals on the team more than the culture itself. I think you get workaholics in India just as well as you get workaholics in America or Germany or the UK, and I think it really is about the individual connections. I wouldn't say like I could easily generalize and say like, if I'm working for someone from India, they're gonna behave this way or any other place I work.
But I do find I worked the first time in 2004 with an Indian offshore team, and back then it was definitely a very big cultural difference between Germany, UK, and India. Just in terms of us Germans were always perceived to be rude, and we always had this perception that everyone in India was just saying yes all the time, the classic stereotype. And I think that has totally gone away. I think people travel more, people work more together. So these days, it's I think more about individuals. I'm not sure. What do you?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Todd. I think it's the individuals that make the team and individuals that set the culture within the team, basically.
I think one thing we touched on earlier, which is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, maybe is it seems like there's always like a home office or like the main, the first. And usually it's the first office. It's like So I'm starting to think of the projects we work on. We work in London, and that was the mothership office, I guess, because it was. But the irony of that is actually we only have a third of the people, if not less. There's actually come a point where the mothership office, because it was the first to engage with the client and delivery management. Like I worked there. Is that perceived to be the main office, and is that always the case?
Are you saying the other offices are more second class
citizens?
Basically,
they're second class citizens. Really, is that?
We did have, I think, at times maybe a little bit of that problem because you have the core knowledge, you have the people who do the inceptions and discovery phases in that primary location, and then it is quite easy to farm out the easy to do the boring stuff to the offshore teams. I think
that has happened quite a lot in my experience with some projects. Luckily for some other projects that hasn't been the case.
I think maybe on that note we should talk about what can we do to make distributed teams and offshore teams work. And I think we've kind of implied already a number of things here. So let's maybe talk about the first thing we discussed was clear responsibilities, and maybe also what you just said, interesting work, I guess, and empower teams. Shall we talk a little bit around that, what we can do to have the clear boundaries?
I think some of the lessons learned I have is that you need to staff your offshore teams properly. Like you can't just leave out roles because.
You mean you have fully functioning
self-contained
teams?
Self-contained teams. You need to have delivery management. You need to have BAs. You need to have QAs. You need to have DevOps. You need to have all these roles to allow that team to function autonomously.
Rather than because QAs or something.
Because if you exclude some of those roles, then the offshore teams are waiting for somebody to come online that fills that role. And that just causes a lot of problems and a lot of overhead. So I think staffing your teams properly is one thing for sure to do. I think finding ways to distribute knowledge across the teams, like have real opportunities to make sure like the tech leads are really in sync.
Yeah.
Having strong leadership on the teams, having strong tech leadership, having strong business ownership. That's really key, because the tech leads need to be able to sync up with across all the different locations and make sure that the team's going in the right direction. What you really want to do is empower the offshore teams to be able to work autonomously, right? Like that's the big thing that we're really looking for. And like you said before, you don't want them to just be twiddling them thumbs, waiting for the mothership to give the give the nod,
give commands and they execute.
Commands that they execute. You want to empower them to make decisions on their own, and that's the way it works best, I think.
Do you want to say anything, Swathi, about leadership? Because I know you have strong opinions about tech leadership in teams, and I think that's really important.
For the first time in a project that I've worked on, I've understood the actual role of technical leadership. So I think I've taken that role a bit for granted, because the other folks that I've worked with were spot on with the role, motivating the team, taking the difficult decisions and stuff like that. I think the major problem that I've found is when there's no tech leadership, and if you have a team that has a lot of opinion but does not take a stand on a certain decision, I think that's where the tech leadership comes in. And if that is not there, it causes a lot of problems, delays, and then like you all said, you wait for the mothership to arrive and then it's like, hey, what do we do? I think that's what has happened to an extent, and Todd is right, we do need to cover all roles.
On that note, let's talk about the separation of work. So assuming you have a system that is distributed, microservice based, the question then is, how do you split the work? So maybe just think front end, back end, right? Is how do we slice by layers and give certain layers, like front end to one team and back end to one team, or do we give certain services to a team, or opinions about like how do we?
So I think a lesson learned that we found on the project we worked on is that I think you can give an offshore team, or any team really, a smaller slice of the pie, but they really suffer because they don't get that full context of the end-to-end business need. And when a team doesn't understand that full context and they're only seeing this sort of tunnel vision view, then they don't understand the implications of the decisions that they're making, right? Yeah. Like they don't understand how it's going to be used really fully. And it's also not very rewarding work. Like you don't know, like, if you're working on a feature that's cross-platform or cross-services, I think that's really more ideal, because you kind of see how things work all the way through the system.
I also think there's massive communication overheads. I mean, we've realized this a number of times when we work together, that if you have to hand over halfway through, where a team is doing half the feature and then another team has to complete, they might not always understand. And it takes quite a while to get them to understand what they're supposed to do. And as we know, no developer likes taking over the code of someone else that's half finished. That's just not a pleasant way to work at. So end to end, as you say, Todd, I think
end to end, feature wise,
I think that's super important.
Yeah, and that all goes in hand with the staffing the team properly, giving them autonomous stuff that enables you to do the end to end features. And then the big thing then that's a barrier in the way is having the communications to sync up, knowledge sharing. And I think one thing you touched on earlier maybe a bit too is that, if people are unhappy in the offshore team, to make sure you get those retrospectives in, make sure you feed that back and try to optimize for the whole system overall, not just locally.
By location, you
really want to make sure that this stuff is fed back and agreed.
I think one thing I find, which we did really well, and I've seen that on most projects we worked on, is that you bring, especially during the when people get onboarded, you bring them together. You have, when we onboard people, they spend a month in another location. So we had a lot of people from India kind of spend 4 weeks at the beginning of the project with us in London, that everyone is in the same room. And now, we're here now in Bangalore with you guys to do some roll-off activities and tying loose ends down. And that makes such a big difference.
I think that's really valuable, because then that's the only way you can create those one-to-one relationships. When you see somebody at the other end of the computer, if you met them, then you're sort of like, oh yeah, that's that person. I had a chance to chat to them and actually understand who that person is as a person. And I think that is really, really valuable.
I think it's also maybe doing a little bit of outside of work, just like having a drink together or something, where you see that person is more than just
Work person.
A work person, exactly.
The guy that does the UX or something like that.
Exactly.
Because that's the great thing about this industry is we get the opportunity to work with people from different parts of the world, and I find that really rewarding to be able to have exposure to all these different cultures and peoples and ways of working. And the more you do that, the more you realize that people are generally pretty much the same. Everybody's got similar aspirations and abilities, and I think that's one thing that becomes really obvious when you travel around.
I think that is actually, I thought about this when we spoke about benefits, that one of the benefits is really the different cultures can be seen as a problem, but I think they are actually more an advantage or an opportunity, because you see people having different thoughts, opinions, attitudes, and we also work with clients from different cultural regions, right? So it's actually good to have either that exposure and also have colleagues in those markets that understand the client maybe a little bit better. So I think this diversity is actually great, right? It's not a disadvantage, and sometimes I think we think everything needs to be homogenous, and I think that is actually maybe the wrong approach. You want a bit of that diversity in your teams, definitely.
Yeah. So I think we should wrap this up. Maybe do some final thoughts.
So before I thought about this, I thought my gut feel is that I don't like offshoring distributed teams. That I always think it's like co-location is definitely best, and it's always what you should push for. But the more I think about it, and just looking at my experiences and having worked with you guys, I think it is actually a massive opportunity, and I think it's actually the right thing to go about delivering software. For the reasons of, as we said, bringing different people together, having a wider resource pool, having maybe time differences that can be a benefit as well. But I think the important thing is that you do this in the right way. You don't go for cheap. You hire experienced, skilled personnel in the other locations. You empower them. You treat them as if they were colleagues with you in the room. And then I think that's a great thing. Super enjoyable. I mean,
yeah. So I'm actually for it because I've only ever worked on distributed deliveries, so I'm absolutely for it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I do agree with Marcel. It's actually meeting new people, learning different cultures, and also when you meet other people with similar skill set, you still know that there's still a lot to learn and long way to go. I just totally believe, like you said, as long as you get the team sizes, the team autonomous teams right, the communication, collaboration right, I think it can do wonders to a delivery basically.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we've worked really well together. I mean, but I don't want to underline, there is a cost. There's definitely a cost.
Yes.
Like I do, like, being a delivery guy, if I could have a co-located, if I could have all of you come to London and work there, I guarantee you that would be just better. We could just, have face-to-face stand-ups and all those, extra things. So that's definitely my preference. But, I think when it comes to the distributed teams, I think we touched on it before. I think you just got to start from trust. I think you have to, you're hiring this team, you're bringing them. I think you got to start from trust.
Yeah.
And you got to give them the tools to be successful. And if you staff them, give them full autonomy, give them an equal share at the table to say, have their say in how things work, how things are architected.
Yep.
Then, I think if you start from that place, then I think it'll be more successful. All right.
All right.
Well, thanks a lot, Swathi.
Thank you for joining us today. Thanks.
Bye.
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 That's it for today's episode. Have a look at our show notes with related information and details on how to get in touch at theburnup.com. We are listener driven, so please do send us your questions, comments, and ideas for new episodes.
We're both practitioners and are happy to discuss interesting opportunities from consulting to coaching to getting involved in actual projects. For inquiries, please visit burnupmedia.com. This podcast is produced by Burnup Media Limited under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license, which means you can share it as long as you give credit, but you cannot change it or make money of it.
Until next time, thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.